My thumb hovered over the send button. My pulse hammered in my throat, a frantic, stupid rhythm. I was exhausted, broke, and completely out of options. So when the burner phone on my kitchen counter lit up with another veiled threat regarding my brother's debt, I lost whatever shred of sanity I had left. I typed 2 words. Fuck you. Sent. The screen went dark. My breathing echoed in the empty apartment. Then a single grey text bubble appeared. Be careful. The air in the room suddenly went ice cold. Rain slashed against the cracked glass of my living room window, distorting the neon glow of the liquor store across the street. I stood motionless in the center of my cramped apartment, staring at the cheap plastic burner phone lying innocuously on the Formica countertop. It was Tommy's phone. He had left it here 3 days ago, before vanishing into the ether, leaving behind nothing but a pile of dirty laundry and a mess that was rapidly swallowing my life whole. Tommy was my older brother, though you wouldn't know it from the way we operated. For the last 10 years I had been the parent, the crisis manager, the human safety net. I patched up his scraped knees when we were kids. And now at 28, I was supposed to patch up his fractured relationships with Boston's criminal underbelly. My feet throbbed. I had just come off a 14-hour shift in the trauma ward at St. Jude's. My scrubs still smelled faintly of iodine, stale sweat, and the metallic tang of someone else's bad luck. I was hollowed out, existing on 3 hours of sleep and half a bagel. All I wanted was a hot shower and the temporary oblivion of my mattress. Instead, the burner phone buzzed. It was a harsh mechanical vibration against the counter. I flinched. The sound was a physical strike in the quiet apartment. I walked over my socks, sliding on the cheap linoleum, and picked it up. Time is up, Tommy. We know where she lives. 50 grand by midnight, or we collect it in flesh. A cold, heavy stone dropped into the pit of my stomach. They knew where I lived. Of course they did. Tommy owed money to Vincent Cole. Vincent Cole wasn't a street thug who broke kneecaps in dark alleys. He was a shadow who operated out of high-rises, a man whose legitimate businesses were just pristine fronts for the kind of money that washed away sins. People didn't cross Vincent Cole. They didn't even speak his name without dropping their voices. And my idiot brother had skimmed from one of his construction sites. Anger, hot and blinding, surged up my throat, choking the fear. I was so tired. I was tired of apologizing. I was tired of looking over my shoulder. I was tired of sacrificing my own miserable paycheck-to-paycheck existence to keep Tommy breathing. I worked 12-hour shifts, saving strangers whose names I would forget by morning, only to come home and find my own blood dragging me toward a grave. I unlocked the screen. My fingers were trembling slick with nervous sweat. I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about Vincent Cole's reputation, or the men he employed, or the absolute certainty that I could not afford to provoke him. I just felt a decade of resentment boiling over. Fuck you, I typed. I hit send. The moment the little arrow turned green, the anger evaporated, leaving behind a terrifying vacuum. My breath hitched. The reality of what I had just done crashed over me like freezing water. I had just cursed out a man who could make me disappear with a flick of his wrist. I stared at the screen, silently pleading for an error message. Message not delivered. Please. 3 dots appeared. He was typing. My heart slammed against my ribs, so hard it bruised. The 3 dots danced on the screen, a mocking little rhythm. It felt like an eternity. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white, waiting for the death sentence. The dots vanished. A new message popped up. Be careful. Just 2 words. No exclamation point. No explicit threat. just a quiet, chilling directive that made all the blood drain from my face. It was the calmness of it that terrified me. If he had sworn back, if he had threatened to burn my building down, I would have understood it. But this was measured. This was a predator watching its prey step blindly into a snare. I dropped the phone as if the plastic casing had turned to hot coals. It clattered against the counter. Panic set in, sharp and metallic. I moved frantically, a frantic energy possessing my exhausted limbs. I rushed to the front door, engaging the deadbolt, the chain lock, and dragging the heavy oak chair from my dining table under the knob. I practically ran to the windows, pulling the flimsy curtains shut, peering through the small gaps into the rain-slicked street below. A black sedan was idling near the curb, its headlights off. My breath caught. Was it them? Had they been out there the whole time? I backed away from the window, my chest heaving. I retreated to the kitchen, opening a drawer and pulling out the largest chef's knife I owned. It felt ridiculous in my hand, a flimsy piece of stainless steel against men who carried automatic weapons. But it was all I had. I sat on the floor of my narrow hallway, my back pressed against the cold plaster wall, my knees pulled to my chest. The knife rested on the floor beside me. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink for hours. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the glass, sent a fresh spike of adrenaline through my veins. I replayed the text over and over in my mind. Be careful. It wasn't advice. It was a promise. I had stepped out of the shadows and directly into Vincent Cole's line of sight. And as the hours dragged on, bringing the slow grey dawn of morning, I realized the worst part wasn't the fear. It was the agonizing certainty that my life, as broken and exhausting as it was, had just irrevocably changed. Sleep never came. By the time my alarm went off at 6, my eyes felt like they were full of crushed glass. I peeled myself off the hallway floor, every muscle stiff and aching from holding the same defensive posture all night. The chef's knife was still beside me, a pathetic testament to my paranoia. I checked the window. The black sedan was gone. I breathed a shallow sigh of relief, but the knot in my stomach remained tight and heavy. I went through the motions of getting ready for my next shift, brushing my teeth with trembling hands, pulling my hair into a messy bun, throwing on a fresh set of navy scrubs. I didn't look at the burner phone. I left it face down on the counter, a toxic object I couldn't bring myself to touch. The walk to the subway was an exercise in pure terror. The morning air was crisp, the city shaking off the rain from the night before, but I felt suffocated. Every man in a dark coat, every car that slowed down near the curb, sent a jolt of electricity down my spine. I kept my head down my hands, shoved deep into the pockets of my jacket, gripping my keys so tightly the metal dug into my palm. The train ride was worse. I stood in the corner of the crowded car, scanning the tired morning faces of commuters. A man in a suit checked his watch. A teenager blasted music through cheap headphones. Normal people living normal lives. I felt entirely detached from them, existing in a parallel universe where breathing felt like a luxury. I arrived at St. Jude's at 7:15. The familiar chaos of the emergency department usually stressed me out, but today I welcomed it. The harsh fluorescent lights, the smell of bleach, the incessant beeping of monitors, it was my territory. It was grounded in a reality I understood. For the first few hours, the sheer volume of trauma distracted me. A multi-car pile-up on the IS-93 kept us moving at a blistering pace. I started IVs, pushed meds, and focused entirely on the fragile, beating hearts of the people in front of me, actively ignoring the frantic hammering of my own. By noon, the rush had thinned. The adrenaline crash hit me like a physical blow. I told my charge nurse I was taking my 30 minutes, and practically dragged myself to the basement cafeteria. It was mostly empty, smelling faintly of overcooked pasta and burnt coffee. I bought a black coffee in a styrofoam cup and found a table in the far corner near the vending machines. I sat down, burying my face in my hands, finally letting the exhaustion wash over me. I just needed 10 minutes of quiet. 10 minutes to figure out how I was going to find $50,000 to save Tommy's miserable life, and by extension, my own. "You look like you've had a rough morning, Sarah." The voice was smooth, cultured, and carried a quiet authority that cut through the low hum of the cafeteria refrigerators. My head snapped up. A man was sitting in the plastic chair across from me. I hadn't heard him approach. I hadn't even felt a shift in the air. He just appeared a phantom in a sharply tailored charcoal suit that looked drastically out of place amid the laminate tables and linoleum floors. He was strikingly handsome, but it wasn't a warm, inviting kind of handsome. It was the sharp, geometric beauty of a weapon. Dark hair meticulously styled, jawline carved from granite. But his eyes were what froze me. They were a pale, icy blue, utterly devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of a man who evaluated everything in terms of leverage and liability. Vincent Cole. I knew it was him immediately. I had never seen a picture of him, but the energy radiating from him left no room for doubt. The air around our table felt heavy, pressurized. Two large men in dark overcoats stood near the cafeteria entrance, casually blocking the doors. I couldn't speak. My mouth went bone dry. The styrofoam cup in my hand crinkled slightly under my sudden, terrified grip. "Your brother," Vincent said, leaning back slightly, his posture relaxed but coiled, "is a remarkably difficult man to find. He scurries quite well." "I don't know where he is," I managed to say. My voice shook, betraying every ounce of fear I was trying to swallow. Vincent didn't blink. He just watched me dissecting my panic. "I know. If you knew where he was, you wouldn't be sitting in a hospital cafeteria drinking terrible coffee. You'd be packing a bag." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. My breath caught my mind, instantly flashing to a suppressed weapon, but he only pulled out a sleek black smartphone. He set it gently on the table between us. "I appreciate a woman with fire." Vincent continued his tone, conversational, almost pleasant. "It shows character. But I don't appreciate being spoken to poorly, especially by someone whose life is currently in my hands." He tapped the screen of his phone. It woke up displaying our text exchange from the night before. "Fuck you. Be careful." Seeing my own words sitting there on his expensive device made me feel incredibly small and impossibly stupid. I was angry. I stammered, hating how weak I sounded. He left me with his mess. Again, anger is a liability, Vincent said softly. He leaned forward, closing the distance between us. He smelled of expensive cedar and danger. "It makes people reckless. It makes them send text messages that force me to come down from my office and introduce myself." I forced myself to meet his icy stare. I was terrified, yes, but beneath the fear, that same stubborn, cynical exhaustion flared up. I had nothing left to lose. Tommy had already spent it all. "So," I said, my voice steadier this time, "you introduced yourself. Are you going to kill me in the basement of a hospital over 50 grand? A ghost of a smile touched the corner of Vincent's mouth. It didn't reach his eyes. "No, Sarah," he said quietly. "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have woken up this morning." He paused, letting the reality of his words sink into my bones. "But Tommy's debt has just been transferred to you. And I think I found a very specific way for you to work it off." "Work it off," I repeated. The words tasted like ash. I stared at the styrofoam cup in my hand, watching the dark liquid ripple slightly from the microscopic tremors in my wrist. $50,000. It was a phantom number. I made a fraction of that in a year, and every cent went to rent groceries and Tommy's bail bonds. I couldn't conceptualize paying it back. I'm a nurse. I said, my voice flat, devoid of the panic that was clawing at my throat. I don't launder money. I don't move drugs. I empty bedpans, push IV fluids, and try to keep gunshot victims from bleeding out on my shoes before the surgeons get to them. Vincent didn't flinch. He sat perfectly still, a statue carved from imported wool and cold calculation. Exactly, he said. The single word hung in the air, heavy and loaded. I frowned my exhaustion, momentarily pierced by genuine confusion. I looked at his eyes, trying to find the trap. St. Jude's is a fine facility. Vincent continued, his gaze drifting lazily over the grimy cafeteria. But my associates frequently find themselves in precarious situations. Situations that require immediate, discreet medical attention. Hospitals ask questions. They file police reports. They create paper trails. Understanding hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. The air left my lungs. "You want me to be a back alley doctor," I whispered. "I want you to be an asset," Vincent corrected smoothly. "You possess a specific skill set. I have a surplus of men who occasionally catch a bullet, take a knife, or sustain blunt force trauma. You will be on call. When my people get hurt, you fix them. Off the books. No questions, no police." I laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the linoleum. "I'm an ER nurse, not a trauma surgeon. I don't have an operating room in my living room." "You will be provided with everything you need," he replied. His voice was entirely devoid of inflection. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a briefing. "A sterile environment, medical supplies, transport. Your only responsibility is to keep my employees breathing. And if they die," I asked, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Vincent finally smiled. It was a terrifying thing, sharp and utterly devoid of warmth. "Then we will have a conversation about your competence, Sarah. But I assure you, I value my investments. And right now, you are a $50,000 investment." I looked at the two men standing by the cafeteria doors. They hadn't moved an inch. They were just waiting for a signal. I could scream. I could flip the table run for the kitchen, find a security guard. But what then? Vincent Cole wouldn't shoot me in a hospital. He would just wait. He would find Tommy. He would find me. There was no police precinct in Boston that could protect me from the reach of a man who owned half the judges in the city. I was trapped. The cage door had swung shut the moment I sent that text message. "How long?" I asked. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else. "Until I deem the debt settled," Vincent said. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a single fluid motion. He looked down at me, his icy blue eyes completely unreadable. "Consider this your orientation. Go back to work, Sarah. Save some civilians. Keep your phone charged." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked away, his two shadows falling in step behind him. The cafeteria doors swung shut, cutting off the low murmur of the hospital lobby. I sat alone at the table for a long time. My coffee went entirely cold. The rest of my shift was a blur of mechanical motion. I drew blood. I administered morphine. I charted vitals. I functioned purely on muscle memory, my brain compartmentalizing the sheer, overwhelming terror of what had just happened. Every time the paging system crackled to life, every time my personal phone buzzed in my scrub pocket, my heart seized. When my shift finally ended at 8 in the evening, I didn't feel relief. I felt a deep, profound dread. The walk back to my apartment was agonizing. The shadows between the streetlights seemed deeper, darker. I unlocked my door, stepping into the cramped, silent hallway. The air was stale. I engaged the deadbolt, the chain lock, and stared at the heavy oak chair, realizing how pathetic my defenses actually were. Vincent Cole didn't need to break my door down. He already owned the space inside my head. I walked into the kitchen. The cheap burner phone was still sitting on the counter, exactly where I had left it. Next to it sat a sleek, black leather duffel bag that definitely hadn't been there when I left for work. My breath hitched. My hands shook as I reached out and unzipped the main compartment. It was a mobile trauma kit, far superior to anything we had in the crash carts at St. Jude's. Surgical steel instruments, combat tourniquets, military-grade clotting sponges, IV bags, and rows of meticulously organized pharmaceuticals, including vials of fentanyl and propofol that I knew for a fact were highly restricted. There was a small cream-colored card resting on top of the supplies. I picked it up. The handwriting was sharp and elegant. "Sleep well. You're on call." I dropped the card. The reality of my new life settled over me, heavy and suffocating. I wasn't just Sarah, the ER nurse, anymore. I was property. 3 days passed in a state of suffocating anticipation. I existed in a state of perpetual high alert. Every ambulance siren outside my window made me jump. Every wrong number on my cell phone sent adrenaline flooding my veins. I dragged myself to my shifts at the hospital, moving through the motions like a ghost completely detached from the bright, fluorescent reality of St. Jude's. The black leather duffel bag sat in the corner of my bedroom, a silent, menacing roommate. I had memorized its contents. I had mentally rehearsed procedures. I tried to convince myself it was just medicine, flesh, blood, bone. It was exactly what I did every day. But the context shifted everything. Treating a car crash victim was a tragedy. Treating a mob enforcer was a crime. The break finally came on a Thursday night. It was 2:14 a.m. Rain was hammering against my bedroom window, masking the ambient noise of the city. I was lying in bed, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, trapped in that agonizing liminal space between exhaustion and insomnia. The burner phone lit up. It didn't ring. It just vibrated against the nightstand, a harsh, angry buzz. I shot up my chest, heaving. I grabbed the phone. The screen was blinding in the dark room. Downstairs. 5 minutes. Bring the bag. No name, no address. Just an order. I didn't hesitate. Fear had metabolized into a cold, clinical autopilot. I threw on a pair of dark jeans, a heavy grey hoodie, and my scuffed running shoes. I grabbed the heavy black duffel bag, slinging the strap over my shoulder. It weighed a ton, packed with enough medical supplies to run a small triage center. I locked my apartment door and took the stairs 2 at a time, avoiding the creaking elevator. The night air hit me like a wet towel as I pushed through the front lobby doors. A black SUV was idling by the curb, its headlights cutting through the heavy rain. The back door swung open from the inside. I climbed in, pulling the heavy bag onto my lap. The interior smelled of wet leather and stale cigarette smoke. There were 2 men in the front seats. Neither of them looked back at me. The driver, a wide-shouldered man with a thick neck, simply put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb. "Where are we going?" I asked. My voice was surprisingly steady. "Keep quiet." The passenger grunted. He didn't turn around. We drove in silence for 20 minutes, heading deep into the industrial sector of South Boston. The city lights faded, replaced by towering chain-link fences, rusting shipping containers and abandoned warehouses. My grip on the duffel bag tightened. This was exactly the kind of place where people disappeared. The SUV pulled into an alleyway behind a sprawling brick building that looked like a defunct meatpacking plant. A heavy metal roll-up door was already half open, spilling a rectangle of harsh yellow light onto the wet asphalt. "Out," the driver said. I slid out of the car, hauling the bag with me. The rain immediately soaked my hair. I walked under the roll-up door, stepping into a cavernous, echoing space. It smelled of motor oil, damp concrete, and something sharp and metallic. Blood. Over here. I turned. Vincent Cole was standing near the center of the room, under a bank of bright industrial halogen lights. He was wearing a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, entirely unbothered by the damp, freezing environment. At his feet, lying on a plastic folding table, was a man. I rushed forward, my professional instincts instantly overriding my terror. I dropped the bag heavily onto the concrete floor and looked at the patient. He was young, maybe early 20s, his face pale and slick with a terrifying amount of sweat. His breathing was rapid and shallow. "Gunshot," Vincent said, coolly stepping back to give me room. "Lower abdomen. Through and through, we think. He's lost a lot of blood." I unzipped the duffel bag, my hands flying over the neatly organized compartments. "Who is he?" I asked, pulling out sterile gloves and a pair of trauma shears. "His name is none of your concern," Vincent replied. "His pulse is." I didn't argue. I didn't have time. I snapped the gloves on and leaned over the kid. I grabbed the hem of his blood-soaked shirt and cut straight up the middle with the shears, exposing his torso. The entry wound was ugly. Right lower quadrant, just above the hip bone. Dark blood was pulsing sluggishly from the ragged hole. "Hey!" I said, tapping the kid's cheek sharply. "Hey, look at me. Stay with me." His eyes rolled back, unfocused. "Cold," he mumbled. "He's going into hypovolemic shock." I barked, my voice echoing in the empty warehouse. I looked up at Vincent. The Mafia Boss was watching me with an eerie, clinical detachment. "I need pressure on this." "Now." Vincent didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, pressing his bare hands firmly over the wadded gauze I slapped onto the wound. He didn't flinch at the blood coating his fingers. I worked frantically. I spiked a bag of saline, found a vein on the kid's pale arm, and started pushing fluids fast. I grabbed a penlight, checking his pupils, then moved to inspect the exit wound on his lower back. It was a mess of torn tissue, but the bleeding wasn't arterial. The bullet didn't hit anything major, or he'd be dead already. I said, talking mostly to myself as I packed the entry wound with combat gauze, the chemical agent burning as it met the blood. "But he needs a hospital, Vincent. I can stabilize him, but I can't do internal surgery on a plastic table." "Stabilize him," Vincent ordered. "Transport is already arranged." For the next 30 minutes, the warehouse ceased to exist. There was only the steady drip of the IV, the ragged sound of the kids breathing, and the slick, terrifying reality of trying to plug holes in a human being. I worked with a manic focus, barking orders for more gauze, demanding better lighting. Vincent complied, silently, watching my every move. Finally, the kid's breathing leveled out. His pulse, while still weak, found a steady rhythm. The bleeding was controlled. I stepped back, ripping the bloody gloves off my hands and tossing them into a biohazard bag from my kit. I was panting, a cold sweat chilling my spine. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling violently. Vincent walked over to a sink in the corner of the warehouse, calmly washing the blood from his hands with a bar of cheap soap. He dried them on a paper towel and turned to look at me. "Excellent work, Sarah," he said quietly. I stared at him, surrounded by the smell of copper and wet concrete, and realized the horrifying truth. I was good at this, and he knew it. Headlights swept across the damp concrete as a grey panel van backed into the warehouse. The piercing beep of its reverse alarm shattered the strange clinical quiet I had managed to build around the plastic folding table. 2 men stepped out of the van, moving with practiced, silent efficiency. They didn't speak to me. They didn't even look at me. They simply transferred the kid, now stabilized, pale and unconscious, onto a collapsible stretcher and loaded him into the back. I stood by the industrial sink, aggressively scrubbing my forearms with a stiff, bristled brush. The water ran pink, swirling down the rusted drain. I focused entirely on the friction, on the sting of the cheap soap against my skin. If I stopped moving, if I let my brain catch up to the reality of the last hour, I was going to throw up. "I'll have someone take you home." Vincent's voice broke my concentration. He was standing a few feet away, his suit immaculate once again, the sleeves rolled down and neatly buttoned. It was jarring to see him so composed when the air still smelled like copper and panic. "I can take the subway," I lied, drying my arms with rough brown paper towels. My voice sounded thin, stretched to its absolute limit. At 3 a.m, Vincent tilted his head, his pale blue eyes pinning me in place. "Don't be ridiculous, Sarah. You have a bag full of narcotics and blood on your shoes. You're getting in my car." It wasn't a suggestion. I grabbed the heavy duffel bag, the strap biting into my shoulder, and followed him out into the rain. The black SUV was waiting. The wide-shouldered driver opened the rear door, and I slid into the leather seat, pulling the bag onto my lap like a shield. Vincent climbed in beside me. The drive was agonizingly quiet. The city outside the tinted windows was a blur of neon streaks and rain-slicked pavement. I stared straight ahead, acutely aware of the space between us. Vincent didn't radiate the restless, chaotic energy that Tommy or the junkies in the ER had. He was a black hole. He absorbed light and sound, projecting a terrifying, absolute stillness. $50,000, Vincent said, suddenly, his voice low over the hum of the tires. I stiffened my grip, tightening on the canvas strap. "What?" "Your brother's debt," he clarified, turning his head to look at me. The passing streetlights cast sharp shadows across his jaw. "It was 50,000. After tonight, consider it 45. I blinked. I tried to process the math, but my brain felt like it was packed with wet cotton. $5,000 for an hour of work. I made that in a month and a half of 12-hour shifts. The sheer absurdity of it made a hysterical, cynical laugh bubble up in the back of my throat. I swallowed it down hard. "So I just have to patch up 9 more of your bullet-riddled employees, and I'm free?" I asked. I meant it to sound defiant, but it just sounded exhausted. Vincent looked away, staring out his window at the passing city. "We will see." He dropped me off right in front of my apartment building. I didn't wait for the driver to open my door. I hauled the bag out into the rain, not looking back, as the SUV merged seamlessly into the night traffic. I locked my door, dragged the heavy oak chair under the knob, and collapsed onto my mattress, fully clothed. I didn't even take off my blood-spattered shoes. The next morning, the alarm went off at 6. I dragged myself out of bed, every muscle aching with a deep systemic fatigue. I went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at my reflection. I looked exactly the same. Dark circles under my eyes, messy brown hair, pale skin. But I felt fundamentally altered. A chasm had opened up inside me. The shift at St. Jude's was brutal. We had a massive influx of flu patients, a domestic assault case, and a man who had put his hand through a plate glass window. I moved through the trauma bays, dispensing medication, suturing lacerations, and comforting terrified families. It was the same job I had done for 5 years, but it felt entirely different. When I stitched up the man's arm, I didn't see a clumsy homeowner. I saw the kid on the plastic table. When the charge nurse handed me a chart, I felt the phantom weight of the burner phone vibrating in my pocket. I looked at the doctors, the orderlies, the security guards, and felt completely isolated. We were standing in the same room, but we existed in different worlds. They operated in the light bound by ethics laws and the Hippocratic Oath. I operated in the dark. During my lunch break, I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage, staring at the steering wheel. The silence was deafening. I was a hypocrite. I was a criminal. I was saving lives, yes, but I was doing it to protect a man who destroyed them for a living. I hated Vincent Cole. I hated my brother for putting me in this position. But as I sat there, the memory of the warehouse flooded back. The panic, the blood, the frantic rush to find the vein. And underneath the terror, a dark, terrible truth surfaced. I had never felt more alive. Weeks bled into one another, measured entirely by the harsh vibration of the burner phone. I stopped jumping every time it rang. I stopped dragging the oak chair in front of my apartment door. Fear, I quickly learned, was unsustainable. The human body cannot exist in a permanent state of fight or flight. Eventually it adapts. The terror metabolized into a grim, cynical routine. I was Sarah the ER nurse by day, and Sarah the underworld medic by night. The jobs varied. Sometimes it was a midnight drive to a warehouse for a knife wound. Once it was a trip to the back room of a high-end restaurant to set the shattered collarbone of an enforcer who had taken a baseball bat to the chest. I asked no questions. I stitched, I prescribed, I stabilized. I watched my imaginary debt drop by increments of $3,000, $4,000, and $5,000. Vincent was almost always there. He never interfered. He never offered medical opinions. He simply watched. He stood in the corner of the room, a silent, imposing spectre, observing me with those icy blue eyes. I tried to ignore him, focusing intensely on the lacerations and the vital signs, but his presence had its own gravity. It pulled at me. It demanded acknowledgement. A twisted intimacy began to form between us. It wasn't romantic. It was the shared, unspoken understanding of people who operated in the gutters of the city. We existed in the blood and the chaos. It was a Tuesday night, raining again. Boston always seemed to be raining lately. The burner buzzed at 11 p.m. Penthouse. Come up through the garage. This was new. I grabbed the duffel bag and took an Uber to the address, a sleek glass and steel high-rise overlooking the harbor. I bypassed the marble lobby, entering through the private garage, and took the dedicated elevator straight to the top floor. The doors opened into a sprawling, immaculate living space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. Minimalist furniture, expensive modern art, dark hardwood floors. It was sterile. It looked like a museum exhibit of extreme wealth. Vincent was sitting on a low grey sofa. His jacket was off his tie, discarded. He held a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in one hand. His other arm was resting on his knee, a bloody towel wrapped tightly around his forearm. I froze the duffel bag, suddenly feeling very heavy. "You're hit." "A minor disagreement with a business associate," Vincent said smoothly, his voice betraying absolutely no pain. He took a slow sip of his drink. "I require your specific skill set." I walked over, dropping the bag onto the glass coffee table. I pulled on my gloves, my professional demeanor instantly snapping into place. "Let me see." He unwrapped the towel. It was a deep, jagged laceration running from his wrist halfway up to his elbow. A defensive wound. Someone had tried to gut him with something very sharp and he had blocked it. The bleeding was sluggish but steady. "You need stitches," I said, reaching into the bag for the lidocaine and a syringe. A lot of them. Who won the disagreement? I did, he replied. I didn't ask what happened to the associate. I didn't want to know. I prepped the area, warning him before I drove the needle into his skin to numb the arm. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just watched my face. You've stopped shaking, Vincent observed quietly as I threaded the surgical needle. I've had a lot of practice lately, I muttered, leaning in close to begin closing the wound. The smell of his cologne cedar and something sharp mixed with the metallic tang of his blood. You're adapting. Most people break under this kind of pressure. They panic. They make mistakes. He paused, taking another sip of his drink with his good hand. You thrive in it. I don't thrive. I snapped, tying off the first suture with a sharp tug. I survive. There's a difference. I do this because you're holding a gun to my brother's head, figuratively speaking. Don't mistake my competence for complicity, Vincent chuckled. It was a low, dark sound that vibrated in his chest. We are all complicit in something, Sarah. The hospital you work for overcharges the dying. The government you pay taxes to funds wars. My business is just more direct. You sell drugs and extort people, I said, flatly tying off another stitch. Let's not romanticize it. I maintain order in a city that desperately wants to tear itself apart, he countered smoothly. And right now your debt sits at $12,000. A few more weeks, and you are free to walk away. Back to your crowded emergency room. Back to your quiet, desperate little life. I finished the last stitch, snipped the thread, and began wrapping his arm in clean white gauze. 12,000. I was almost out. The thought should have brought me immense relief. Instead, it felt like stepping off a ledge. What was I going to do when this was over? Go back to worrying about rent. Go back to waiting for Tommy to ruin my life again. My personal phone, not the burner, but my actual cell phone rang. The sound shattered the heavy silence of the penthouse. I jumped. I hadn't received a call on that phone at this hour in years. My heart slammed against my ribs. I pulled it out of my pocket. The caller ID was a blocked number. I looked at Vincent. He was watching me, his expression perfectly unreadable, but a sudden chilling sharpness had entered his eyes. I answered it. Hello? Sarah. The voice was frantic, breathless, and laced with a terror that made my blood run instantly cold. It was Tommy. Tommy, where are you? I demanded, turning away from Vincent. Sarah, you gotta help me. I messed up. I messed up really bad. Tommy choked out the sound of traffic blaring in the background. I'm at the bus station. They're looking for me. Cole's guys. You have to come get me. Please. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I stood perfectly still in the center of the $1 million penthouse, holding the phone to my ear. I slowly turned my head, looking back at the man sitting on the grey sofa. Vincent was swirling the amber liquid in his glass. He wasn't looking at my face. He was looking at the phone in my hand. And he was smiling. The silence in the penthouse was absolute, broken only by the tinny, desperate sound of Tommy's breathing echoing through the phone speaker. I stood frozen, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. The realization hit me in a sickening wave. Vincent hadn't been looking at my hands while I stitched him up. He had been looking at his own watch. He knew this call was coming. Tommy, slow down. I forced the words out, my voice sounding incredibly loud in the cavernous room. Why are his men looking for you? The debt is almost paid. I've been paying it. A pathetic wet laugh scratched through the receiver. Paid Sarah, it's not just the 50 grand anymore. I needed a stake to get out of town. I went to one of his lockups in Roxbury. I thought it was empty. I swear to God, I thought it was empty. I only took a kilo. Just one. I was going to sell it in Philly and pay you back. I closed my eyes. The exhaustion hit me so hard, my knees actually buckled a fraction of an inch. I had spent the last month up to my elbows in the blood of criminals. I had compromised every single moral boundary I possessed. I had stopped sleeping. I had lived in a state of perpetual terror, all to dig him out of a grave he dug himself. And he had just picked up a shovel and started digging a new one. You stole from him again, I stated. It wasn't a question. It was the death knell of my old life. I had to. They were gonna kill me anyway, Sarah. You know how these people are. Tommy screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. Just come to the Greyhound station. Bring whatever cash you have. Please. If they find me, I'm dead. I slowly lowered the phone, ending the call without saying goodbye. The screen went black. I turned to look at Vincent. He hadn't moved. He took another deliberate sip of his drink, the crystal clinking softly against the ice. The bloody towel sat discarded on the glass table next to my open duffel bag. "1 kilo of uncut cocaine," Vincent said quietly, his pale blue eyes pinning me to the floorboards. "Street value of roughly $40,000. Factoring in the insult of breaking into my facility, I'd say your brother's debt has just reset. With interest." "You knew," I whispered. My voice shook, but not from fear. The anger was back hot and blinding, burning away the shock. "You let him do it. You set a trap for him." Vincent set his glass down. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, wincing slightly as the fresh stitches pulled taut. "I didn't set a trap, Sarah. I simply left a door unlocked. Your brother made the choice to walk through it. He is a parasite, a compulsive thief. He takes the path of least resistance, regardless of who it destroys." I stepped forward, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "You don't know him." "I know him intimately," Vincent corrected his tone, dropping to a dangerous icy register. "I know men exactly like him. They fill my prisons and bleed out on my warehouse floors. They are a predictable algorithm of bad decisions. And you are the only thing keeping him alive. You are his shield." He stood up. Despite his injury, he moved with the fluid, coiled grace of a predator. He closed the distance between us until he was standing mere inches away. He smelled of cedar, expensive scotch, and blood. "I gave you an opportunity to work off his debt," Vincent said softly, staring down at me. "And you excelled. You proved your worth. But Tommy will never stop taking from you. He will drain you until there is nothing left but a hollow shell of an emergency room nurse. He just stole from me, Sarah. Again. By the rules of my world, he is already a dead man." My throat was impossibly tight. "What are you saying?" "I am giving you a choice," he replied. "The front door is behind you. You can take the elevator down, hail a cab, and go to the bus station. You can empty your pathetic savings account, give it to him, and watch him get on a bus. If you do that, you assume his new debt. You belong to me entirely. No end date. No $50,000 cap. You are mine on call for the rest of your natural life." The words hung in the air, heavy as lead. "Or," I managed to ask, my voice trembling. "Or," Vincent said, his eyes darkening, "you leave your bag on my table. You walk out of this building and you go home. You go to sleep. You wake up tomorrow and you go to work. And you let me clean up the mess your brother made." He was offering me a way out. He was offering to sever the dead weight that had been dragging me underwater for a decade. All I had to do was let him kill my brother. "You're a monster." I breathed tears of sheer frustration, burning the corners of my eyes. I am a realist, Vincent countered smoothly. And you are finally starting to see the world as it actually is. The clock is ticking, Sarah. My men are already sweeping the transit hubs. If you are going to save him, I suggest you leave now. He turned his back to me, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling windows to look out over the rain-swept city. He didn't say another word. He just left me there, standing over the open medical bag, tearing at the seams of my own conscience. I looked at the sterile bandages. I looked at the door. I grabbed my jacket. I left the duffel bag on the table. And I ran. The Greyhound station at South Station was a cathedral of misery. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly greenish pallor over the rows of plastic chairs. It smelled of stale urine, wet wool, and cheap coffee. Homeless men slept huddled in corners while exhausted travelers stared blankly at the departure boards. I pushed through the heavy glass doors, the cold rain dripping from my hair down the back of my neck. I scanned the chaotic room. My chest heaved with a mixture of exertion and pure panic. I had run 3 blocks from the subway, dodging puddles and aggressively ignoring the shadows in the alleys. I spotted him near the vending machines in the far corner. Tommy. He was pacing frantically, his thin shoulders hunched inside a jacket that was 2 sizes too big. He looked awful. His skin was sallow, his eyes sunken and darting wildly around the room. He was a cornered animal. I walked toward him. With every step, the heavy realization of what I was doing pressed down on me. I was choosing this. I was choosing a lifetime of servitude to Vincent Cole, a lifetime of patching up bullet wounds in damp warehouses just to keep this pathetic man breathing. Tommy, I said. He whipped around. The sheer relief that washed over his face made my stomach churn. Sarah. Oh, thank God. Thank God. He closed the distance, grabbing my arms with trembling, clammy hands. Did you bring the money? I need a ticket to Philly. The next bus leaves in 20 minutes. Do you have cash? He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask if I was followed. He didn't even notice that I looked like I hadn't slept in a month. He just looked at my pockets. I stared at him. Really stared at him. For the first time in my life, the protective filter of sisterhood dissolved. I didn't see the little boy who used to share his comic books with me. I saw exactly what Vincent Cole saw. I saw a bottomless pit. I don't have the money, I said quietly. Tommy's face dropped. The relief instantly morphed into ugly, desperate anger. What do you mean you don't have the money? You're a nurse. You make good, Tommy. Go to an ATM, Sarah. They're gonna kill me. I don't have it, Tommy, because I've been giving every spare cent I have to Vincent Cole to keep your legs from being broken. I replied, my voice disturbingly calm. The hysteria had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, absolute clarity. I have been working off your debt, in the dark, doing things that could get my medical license revoked and put me in federal prison. He blinked, waving his hands dismissively. Yeah, I know it's been tough, but this is life or death. Sarah, just get cash on your credit card. You can figure it out later. You always figure it out. You always figure it out. Those 5 words broke the final frayed string holding me to him. He wasn't sorry. He was just inconvenienced. He viewed my suffering as a natural resource, something to be extracted whenever he dug himself too deep. No, I said. Tommy froze. What? I said no. I took a step back, pulling my arms out of his grasp. I reached into my jeans pocket and pulled out a crumpled $50 bill. It was the only cash I had on me. I held it out. This will get you a local ticket. Get out of Boston. Don't go to Philly, just run. He stared at the bill as if it were a venomous snake. $50. Are you out of your mind? Sarah Cole's guys are gonna find me. You're signing my death warrant. You signed it yourself, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. When you broke into that lockup, when you stole a kilo of cocaine from a man who owns this city. Tommy's eyes widened in sheer panic. How do you know about that? Because I was sitting in his penthouse, stitching up a knife wound on his arm when you called me, I said flatly. The color completely drained from Tommy's face. He stumbled back, bumping into the vending machine. He finally looked at me, truly looked at me, and saw the cold, cynical emptiness in my eyes. He realized in that split second that his safety net was gone. I didn't wait for him to speak. I dropped the $50 bill on the dirty linoleum floor. Goodbye, Tommy. I turned around and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't listen to his frantic shouting echoing behind me. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped back out into the freezing rain. The cold air hit my face, shocking my system, but I felt incredibly light. The crushing weight that had sat on my chest for 10 years was gone. I stood on the curb, letting the rain soak through my clothes. I had nowhere to go. I had left my medical bag in the penthouse. My shift at the hospital didn't start for another 12 hours. Headlights cut through the downpour. A heavy black SUV pulled silently up to the curb directly in front of me. The engine idled with a low, menacing purr. The back door swung open from the inside. I looked into the dark interior. Vincent Cole was sitting in the back seat, the shadows obscuring his face, but I could feel the weight of his pale blue eyes. He didn't say a word. He didn't ask what happened inside the station. He just waited. I stood in the rain for 3 long seconds. Then I stepped forward, pulled myself into the back seat, and pulled the door shut behind me, sealing myself in the dark. Rain hammered against the roof as the heavy car door slammed shut, sealing away the storm, and the pathetic image of Tommy standing by the vending machines. The SUV's interior was a sensory deprivation chamber, completely isolated from the grime outside. It smelled of conditioned leather and Vincent's sharp cedar cologne. I sat stiffly on the edge of the seat, my wet clothes clinging to my skin. I was shivering uncontrollably, coasting on a massive adrenaline crash. Vincent reached into a compartment between the seats, pulled out a thick towel and tossed it onto my lap. "Dry your hair," he said quietly. "You'll freeze." I pressed the ridiculously soft cotton against my face, inhaling the clean scent of luxury detergent, and let out a long breath. When I lowered it, Vincent was watching me. The passing street lamps illuminated the sharp angles of his face and the stark white bandage I had wrapped around his arm less than an hour ago. "He's still at the station," I said, my voice raspy and hollow. "I gave him $50. It's enough for a local bus. If your men catch him, they catch him. I don't care anymore." Vincent absorbed the information without a flicker of surprise. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid from a crystal decanter and held the glass out to me. "Drink." The liquor burned a fiery trail down my throat, chasing away the bone-rattling chill. I closed my eyes, letting the artificial heat radiate through my chest. "You made the logical choice, Sarah," Vincent said, a low rumble over the engine. "You severed a diseased limb to save the body. You stopped the infection." "Don't," I snapped, glaring at him. "Don't try to make this sound surgical or righteous. I just abandoned my own brother to monsters like you." "You abandoned him to the consequences of his own actions," Vincent corrected smoothly. "And as for monsters, you are sitting in my car. Voluntarily." He was right. That was the most terrifying part. I hadn't been forced. I had walked out, seen his car waiting in the deluge, and stepped into the dark because I had nowhere else to go. because the sanitized bureaucracy of St. Jude's felt like a massive lie I could no longer stomach. "So what happens now?" I asked, staring at the empty glass. "Does the debt transfer back to me? Am I on call for the rest of my natural life?" Vincent shifted, adjusting his injured arm. He looked out the rain-streaked window for a long moment before turning his icy blue eyes back to me. "The debt," Vincent said softly, "was Tommy's. It was anchored to you only because you allowed it to be. You were the one holding the rope. The moment you dropped that $50 bill on the floor, the anchor broke. The debt is zero." I stopped breathing. The air in the cabin suddenly felt incredibly thin. "Zero, he confirmed. "My driver will take you to your apartment. Tomorrow you wake up, put on your scrubs and go to your shift. The burner phone will not ring. The duffel bag will be collected. You are a civilian again, Sarah. Free and clear." I stared at him, frantically searching his face for the trick, the hidden clause. There was none. He was giving me exactly what I had prayed for every single day for the last month. He was giving me my life back. But the thought of returning to my cramped apartment made my stomach clench. The thought of standing in the ER, dealing with mundane tragedies, pretending I hadn't spent the last 30 days operating on the bleeding edge of life and death. It felt impossible. The cage door was open, but I didn't want to fly away. I looked at the neat stitches I had placed beneath his skin. I had crossed a fundamental line, and there was no erasing the footprints. "No," I said. Vincent tilted his head, a single dark eyebrow arching in genuine curiosity. "No, I'm not going back to St. Jude's," I said, my voice steadying, the last traces of fear evaporating. "I quit. The pay is garbage, the hours are worse, and they don't let me do half the things I'm actually capable of." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Vincent's face. It was the first time I had ever seen a genuine expression break his heavily calculated facade. It changed his entire face. "Is that right?" he murmured. "I want my bag back," I told him, holding his intense gaze without flinching. "I want a sterile workspace, a private clinic entirely off the books with proper surgical equipment, and I want 10% of whatever you are going to extort out of the men I save." Vincent chuckled a rich, dark sound that filled the small space. He reached out his warm, rough fingers, lightly brushing a damp strand of hair from my face. The touch sent a jolt of electricity down my spine. 10% is steep," he whispered. "I'm worth it," I replied, leaning slightly into his touch. "I'm a very good investment." Vincent's smile widened. He tapped twice on the thick glass partition, separating us from the driver. The window slid down silently. Change of destination. Vincent ordered, his eyes never leaving mine. "Take us home." The partition slid back up. The SUV banked sharply onto the highway, leaving the Greyhound station, my brother, and my entire exhausting past in the rearview mirror. I leaned back against the plush leather, watching the city blur. I had traded the righteous, impossible struggle for a comfortable seat in the shadows. I was a cynic, a criminal, and the personal physician to the most dangerous man in Boston. And for the first time in a decade, I finally felt like I could breathe. Did this gritty, high-stakes romance keep you on the edge of your seat? Sarah's dramatic journey from an exhausted, exploited ER nurse to the underworld's most valuable asset proves that sometimes the only way to survive the dark is to fully embrace it. If you loved this intense, slow-burn mafia drama, hit that like button right now to let us know. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow dark romance addicts and subscribe to the channel for more gripping, immersive stories. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Stay dangerously hooked.